Did you know Retro Studios made a prototype for a Portal-like puzzle game after they finished Metroid Prime 3? It was called Adept, but publicly it's never even been heard about until today, and the footage you're seeing now is the prototype. We talked to a dozen former Retro devs and got new footage for quite a few projects, and heard whispers about a couple others. Raven Blade, Thunder Rally, Metaforce, codenamed the Blob Game, Project X, just to name a few. And also some never-before-seen Metroid Prime proto-footage. Check it out. It's Samus back when she was 80s supermodel Cindy Crawford. We'll get to that later. But first, let's start with Adept. Now keep in mind, this is an early proof of concept running in the Prime 3 engine, so don't expect oodles of polish. Its purpose was to illustrate mechanics, not showcase graphics. In this video, we're going to explore projects that got the green light, but this first one is more of a playable pitch that Nintendo said no to, which is unfortunate, because a Portal game made by the Prime guys could have been brilliant. This was late 2007 into early 08. Retro was putting together the Prime Trilogy collection for Wii, and trying to figure out what their next big project was going to be. Portal had just come out. If you're not familiar, the game's main mechanic is making two portals and anything that goes in one comes out the other. Objects, enemies, projectiles, yourself, anything. Adept was going to take that general premise and evolve it. It's probably not like anything you've ever played before, so the easiest way to explain it is Portal with combat. If you want the more complex explanation, instead of portals, Adept used cylinders. There are teleportation cylinders, but instead of just two like in Portal, you can make as many as you want. Another type is force cylinders, which push anything that comes inside upwards. They're mostly used for jumping, but you can also attach them to ceilings to push force downward, or on walls to push sideways. Oftentimes you'll need to combine several to get yourself or an object where you want to go. This is an attraction cylinder. In this clip, you magnetize yourself to attract a heal item, and here an enemy is about to throw projectiles at you. But you hit him with an attract, so all the projectiles are sucked back and kill him. These are fire cylinders. You can use them in puzzles to light things on fire or melt ice, and they're also useful for lighting up enemies. Careful though, because they can do the same to you. Ice cylinders are pretty similar, useful for freezing objects, putting out flames, and killing enemies. Enemies can't see your cylinders, but you can make an infinite number to kill them, solve puzzles, and so on. That's the basics of Adept, but of course there would have been a lot more if it got the green light. The prototype was made by one guy, Metroid Prime 2 and 3 programmer Paul Tozer, who got enough excitement internally at Retro to present it to the whole company, and eventually Nintendo's higher-ups in Japan. This footage was presented to the Nintendo producer who oversaw Retro's projects, Kensuke Tanabe, but it didn't click with him. Retro's handlers at Nintendo didn't seem to know what Portal was, and didn't really play games made outside Nintendo. Here's Paul.
Nintendo Japan is very insular, and there is very much a not invented here syndrome. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that they do have these extraordinary design skills. They've all trained under Miyamoto-san. In fact, at one point, I bought a copy of Portal, tried to give it to Kensuke Tanabe, tried to explain to them, I'm going to pitch you this game concept, but could you please take a look at this because it's amazing and it'll help you understand what I'm going to pitch. And they basically said, we can't accept gifts. Sorry, company policy. It was not intended as a gift. It was intended as, I'm letting you borrow this so that you can see a game that has really incredible design.
Paul blamed himself for Adept's failure to launch. As the designer, it was his responsibility to sell the concept, and Tanabe didn't bite. Also, in the pitch version, there was an overly complicated UI that Paul later wished he removed for simplicity. After Tanabe said no, Retro management told Paul he could keep working on Adept, but only if he converted into a Nintendo DS game. The higher-ups always wanted a DS side project. That's why they asked Nintendo if they could make Heroes of Hyrule a few years earlier. We've got a video on that project too if you want to see it. Nintendo actually got it yanked off YouTube for a while in a legal dispute against our channel. Hopefully they don't zap this video too. But anyways, Paul didn't think Adept would work on DS, so the whole thing ended up going kaput. Before we get to more games, let's go back in time to the studio's meteoric rise because it's pretty interesting. As we see it, there are three distinct Retro Studios eras, with the first starting the day it was founded and ending a few years later when the former was forced out by Nintendo. The second era's from then until 2008, when Metroid Prime's lead developers were physically escorted off the premises never to return. And the third era stretches from that fateful day up to the present. We'll start at the very beginning. Well, a little before the beginning, actually. In 1991, a self-taught programmer named Jeff Spangenberg founded Iguana Entertainment, the studio most famous for making Turok. He named it after his two pet iguanas, Spike and Killer. 3 years later, Spangenberg became a millionaire by selling his company to Acclaim, though he stayed on as a producer. Iguana started to go downhill though when Acclaim moved them into a new office space. Before, everyone was on the same floor, but now they put the executives upstairs and the workers downstairs. Total culture change. Spangenberg made himself more accessible to the downstairs devs, but in 1998 there was an Ides of March and he got forced out by the other execs. There was bad blood. Spangenberg sued, then immediately founded a new studio. He called it Retro Studios because retro gaming was coming into fashion at the time, but other names were considered as well, like Mongoose Studios, because mongooses kill iguanas. Jeff had the respect of the devs he used to lead, and Retro's earliest employees were guys who defected from Iguana to join him. Then they moved into the old Iguana building, the one where everyone was together on the same floor. To get Retro's startup funding, they initially weighed competing offers between Nintendo and Electronic Arts. Here's Sid Newman, the first of the Iguana defectors.
It was between EA and Nintendo. EA, first off, did not have a really good name going into that period of time. Didn't they get sued by the wives of their employees at one point or something because of the hours they were making them work? But he took Nintendo's money, so I stuck around.
It's interesting to think how different history might have been if they took EA's money instead. There never would have been a Metroid Prime, and Retro probably would have got shut down before they even finished their first game. EA's done that to countless other studios. Nintendo's offer wasn't necessarily more money, but they gave Retro more independence, and they had a more attractive stable of IPs. Nintendo wanted Retro to be their big stateside studio, kind of like a bigger, better American version of Rareware. So they pumped in millions of dollars and Spangenberg spent them lavishly. Retro built the first motion capture studio in the state of Texas, an in-house movie theater, and super expensive furniture.
I'm like, what the f***? I couldn't believe how the money was being spent early on. It was just crazy.
Spangenberg also paid out high salaries, and unlike most other studios, he instituted profit sharing, so all staff earned royalties for every game they put out. With all that money getting thrown around, Retro ballooned to over 200 developers before they'd shipped a single product. They took in top talent from Iguana, id Software, Valve Corporation, and even EA. They started off working on 4 games, but for reasons you'll hear throughout this video, all of them ended up getting cancelled. Jeff Spangenberg was a great producer. That's why Sid and so many others followed him from Iguana in the first place. But,
Jeff got himself a little deep in the titty bars. He got distracted.
As you'll hear more later, those distractions eventually caught up to him, and are why things turned out the way they did. But the cracks were already forming at Retro's inception. Ravenblade was one of their earliest projects. An action RPG one dev said was going to be like Zelda but with a few twists on the formula. Sid thought of it a little differently.
I would see it somewhere between Ocarina of Time and Games of Thrones. Zelda always has this kind of uplifting feel about it. No matter, even in the darkest of times, there feels like there's something colorful and spiritual and exciting, and this just felt a little darker, and with the dragons and everything, it just felt it felt a little more adult than what Nintendo was putting out at the time. And I think that's kind of the audience we were going for.
Ravenblade's design doc was hundreds of pages in length. It was going to be an epic quest starring a knight exploring dark land, cryptic ruins, and a city in the sky. Lots of items, weapons, and magic to collect, and NPCs to interact with like blacksmiths, magicians, townfolk, and a king. It was even going to have voice acting, and voice lines for several characters were recorded and motion captured. For a while, it was the most promising game coming to GameCube, and a lot of folks were hyped for it. Unfortunately, our sources say Ravenblade had a lot of problems. There was way too much in those hundreds of design pages. It would have taken 7-8 years to turn into a game, and by then the console generation would have come to a close. As far as story, an official press release from Nintendo said it was going to be, quote, set in a legendary time when one hero must hold back the forces of chaos. Only the ancient and mysterious Raven Blade can thwart the evil machinations of the Beast Lord. If that sounds vague and generic, it's because the details of the plot were constantly in flux, so it's hard for anyone to say what exactly the story actually was. The same can be said of the combat. The designers were constantly playing popular games of the time, then reworking Raven Blade to feel more like those games. First and foremost, they were trying to cook up a hit, but by frequently changing direction, the game suffered from a lack of consistent vision and failed to make forward progress. Another major problem was that it was too ambitious for GameCube. Nintendo overpromised on the power of their upcoming console, so when Retro got the real GameCube development kits, they realized they were kinda screwed.
There was no silicon, there was no GameCube at the time. Everything was running on emulator. The emulator was inaccurate, drastically inaccurate. It was really cool. It was great ideas. But when they counted up the number of bones that it would require to run the animations, and there were more bones in one character than the GameCube was capable of pushing in a total scene. That wasn't what they were told when they designed this stuff.
It would have been the floating hero game because we couldn't run anything else but that one character. It was awesome. I mean, he looked beautiful, but it was impractical.
Ultimately, Nintendo gave Retro a deadline of 3 months before the GameCube's launch to make an acceptable amount of progress on Raven Blade, or else they'd stop funding its development. By this point, Spangenberg had kinda checked out. He'd gotten too good a taste of the high life. Yacht parties, strippers, nose candy. Some of his staff got pissed off when they were struggling on Raven Blade, and one day Spangenberg pulled up in a beautiful new Ferrari. The only reason he bought it was because Doom programmer John Carmack was trying to win it in an auction, and Spangenberg wanted to outbid him. Needless to say, Raven Blade didn't make the turnaround Nintendo demanded, so the game got canned, and a couple dozen devs got laid off. Another early project was Car Combat, also known as Thunder Rally. Gameplay footage was never made public, only a handful of images. We managed to acquire some never-before-seen models and animations. It ain't much, but at least we can finally see something in motion. Also, the devs were willing to tell us some new info about it. They called it a twisted metal killer, taking place in a Mad Max-style setting.
It was going for that twisted metal audience. It had a really nice look to it. The physics, handled really nice. It felt really nice to drive. It was fun. But yeah, it was definitely in that twisted metal vein.
It was really fun to me. I thought it was great. It's very Mad Max. I think it kind of just, you know everything you need to know about it by calling it Car Combat.
It was originally intended as the GameCube's big online launch title, something that was sorely missing not only from the launch lineup, but the console's entire life cycle. You'd be able to matchmake with up to 4 players, or if you had actual friends, there was also offline split screen. It was heavy on the combat, but unlike Twisted Metal, Retro's take was a racing game. Lead artist Alex Toder told us there were 15 levels planned, but only 3 completed: a city, a junkyard, and a Metro Underground. A big focus was shortcuts and interactive environments. The junkyard, for example, had rows of junk cars you could ramp over, while cranes drop more cars down on you as snowplows move around opening and closing off various shortcuts. The city had alleyways you could cut through, and the Metro Underground was a big oval like a traditional racetrack, but you could get off at a couple stations and take alternate routes. Memorable characters would have been another focus, but they didn't get that far in development, only ending up with a few vehicles, like a wrecker and a cop car. Around the time it got cancelled, Retro higher-ups went into a meeting with Shigeru Miyamoto and other Nintendo executives. Miyamoto was like, "Why would you drive a car to shoot a gun? I don't get it." Alex Toder said, quote, "My reply was, this game from my understanding is for the Western market where players certainly understand the culture of cars and guns and weaponry. Twisted Metal and Carmageddon should serve as an example." Nonetheless, one of Retro's producers scolded me at lunch break and asked me not to join back into the meeting after lunch because he felt I was too upfront, and he didn't want to upset their Japanese counterparts. All the lower level guys who weren't in that meeting were like, "Why didn't you just tell him it's like Mario Kart? Characters, racing, and shooting? Dude, you should have said Mario Kart." Some of y'all might be thinking Car Combat didn't need to exist if we already had Mario Kart, but you gotta remember Double Dash didn't come out till halfway into the GameCube's lifespan. It also targeted a younger audience and didn't have online. Unfortunately for Car Combat, the Cube's internet functionality wasn't up to snuff, and Nintendo wanted to consolidate resources behind Metroid, so Car Combat got cancelled.
Oh yeah, and it sucked. It was a really big morale hit.
To them, it was like canceling a project was like, well, it's just what you do. and you guys shouldn't be upset about it. And the team should just be able to shift gears and get over it. And that was kind of foreign to the way that my guys had done things. There was a certain passion to all the projects that we were working on. And they put in a lot of work, and they hated to see that work just go up in flames.
The team says Nintendo could have had their own adult-oriented IP even bigger than Twisted Metal. And without car combat, the GameCube's launch lineup was left lacking. And that limping start ended with Nintendo coming third in the 6th-generation console war. Next up is Retro NFL Football, also known as NFL 2002. We know most Nintendo fans couldn't care less about sports, so we'll be brief and focus less on the gameplay, it's football, and instead talk about the behind the scenes. Back when they worked at Iguana, Sid and some other guys made NFL Quarterback Club for N64. Nintendo was so impressed with that game, they paid Iguana millions of dollars not to release a PlayStation version that was already 100% finished. A couple years later, EA announced their popular Madden football series wouldn't be coming to GameCube, so Nintendo figured, hey, we've got an American studio with those same guys that made Quarterback Club, let's have them make a new football game. Retro actually wanted to use Nintendo IP to make Mario Kickoff Football, but Japan said no. They wanted this game to attract a more mature audience, so Retro acquired the NFL license and had real-life Dallas Cowboys come in and do motion capture.
I still haven't seen anything that would have matched its motion to this day. To be honest, the stunt guys did so much better than the football players did. They wouldn't give it their all. They wouldn't put themselves out there. The stunt guys, man, one guy took a hit so hard that he just wobbled. Some huge hits that these guys took we got all this data. It was just absolutely brutal. But, about the only thing we could get out of the big name stuff was like a treadmill run or something. And you'd try and get that just so you could put the bullet point on the box. But past that, most of the big name stuff wasn't really worth the time.
Some said the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders came into mocap too, but others thought that sounds too good to be true, so it's hard to say if that actually happened. World-famous cheerleaders or not, the dev team was putting in 12-hour workdays, and Retro Football was looking good. But eventually EA backtracked and announced they were going to bring Madden to GameCube, so Retro Football just kinda didn't need to exist anymore.
But what really put the nail in the coffin on that was EA coming back and saying, no, we will put Madden on the machine. Right, and Nintendo's like, well, then we don't really need a football game, right? In fact, it'd be done for us to do it.
And that was like really close to shipping, just to the point of like UI, UX adjustments, UI polish. It's one of those weird examples where a game was almost done and got cut right at the threshold of completion, and that was sad.
Others don't remember it being quite so close to completion. In fact, devs' memories about a lot of this stuff varied. It has been 25 years. Regardless, it was going to be tough standing out in a crowded field, especially after the Dreamcast died and Sega said they were bringing their football series to the Cube too. EA and Sega's franchises were already well established with strong brand recognition, and Retro Football was just too similar. So in retrospect, maybe the right call would have been making Mario Kickoff Football from the very beginning. To this day, there's been Mario Golf, tennis, soccer, baseball. He's even teamed up with Sonic for the Olympics, but he's still never played football. The last of Retro's early projects was Metaforce, also known as Action Adventure. This is the one that eventually turned into Metroid Prime, but it went through quite a few changes even before that, with bits and pieces ultimately making their way into Metroid. There were thousands of pages of design documents, so we'll sum it up as best we can. At the outset, Metaforce starred 3 playable characters with very distinct playstyles: a cybernetic brick, a psychic ninja, and a rifle-wielding assassin.
We decided to go with a set of female characters because in third person at the time, let's look at a female character instead of a male character, right?
Together, they formed a team called Metaforce, which is how the game got its name. It took place in a near-future world where gene editing had become inexpensive, and therefore quite common. The game was divided into 3 chapters about 10 hours each, with each chapter's antagonist being an arch-nemesis of one of the girls. The primary villain of Chapter 1 was a Luddite cult leader terrorist, who used gene editing to create a bunch of 4-armed mutants to serve as his foot soldiers. Chapter 2's villain was a Nazi eugenicist, who wanted to steal the 3 Metaforce girls' genes so he could engineer a master race of hotties. And the final villain was a mind-controlling South African who it'd turn out was behind everything. funding the terrorists, and manipulating the world's political leaders.
There was this one level where the terrorist guy, they were basically carrying this re-engineered mammoth to the zoo in an armored car or whatever, and he blows up the caravan and lets the mammoth loose, and the mammoth is rampaging through the city, destroying stuff, and you've got to deal with the bad guys, but then also the mammoth that's running around destroying things too. That was a really cool mission. So we developed those characters, built out a lot of game systems, came up with basically a whole game world and a really interesting set of missions. Really some of the greatest design work I think I've done in my career.
Nintendo of America liked how it was going, but asked them to cut it down to just one character to ensure that one character felt really good to control. So then it was just Bryn, the cybernetic brick. NOA also said third-person cameras are hard to get right, so had them change it to first-person. Development progressed in that direction for a while, until Miyamoto was like, Bryn's kinda generic. Can you come up with a more interesting protagonist? Also, does the world really need another first-person shooter?
It was one of the problems with Retro, actually, was that we were constantly getting different sets of instructions from Japan and from North America. Those two groups didn't talk at all, and so we'd go in one direction, and then one or the other would come down and say, no, we didn't like that direction.
So the Metaforce team took 1,000 pages of design documents and threw them in the trash, changed it back to third person, and wrote a new 1,000 pages, now starring an alien protagonist. The new plot was that there's an evil alien race going planet to planet enslaving other species. In the 1970s, a UFO crashes on Earth, and on board is a slave alien. A slave baby, actually. The US government recovers the UFO and raises the alien to fight against the evil aliens, who now have Earth on their enslavement to-do list. We're not at the top of the to-do list yet, though, so the evil aliens are just sending small squads to seize technology and kill human scientists so we can't get too advanced, and will be easier to conquer when they eventually do show up for a full-scale invasion. The alien protagonist doesn't know much at the start of the game, but as you progress, his origin story slowly gets revealed, and the eventual realization that he's fighting the species that enslaved his race gives him extra incentive to destroy them. Instead of the 3 girls, Metaforce is now the name of the US government team you're a part of.
You were the group that was dispatched whenever, if you shot down a UFO, you were the group that was dispatched to go and grab it. Kill any aliens that you found that survived, and then secure the site so that, we could come and take away all the equipment so no one would know about the, kind of a Men in Black sort of situation, right?
As far as game mechanics, the hero alien had camo skin, he could jump super far, hear enemies behind walls, and stun enemies with a sonar pulse. One day out of the blue, Miyamoto said, "Hey, your alien designs would make great space pirates. Want to make this into a Metroid game instead?" The Metaforce team said yeah, they'd love to. But why would Miyamoto trust this floundering studio to reboot one of Nintendo's most iconic franchises? Well, first of all, Metroid had always sold more in the West than it did in Japan, so there was some thinking that a Western studio understood the audience better. Also, Miyamoto made Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, lots of Nintendo franchises, but he didn't make Metroid. It wasn't his baby, it was someone else's.
Miyamoto didn't care if we killed it. If we did a bad job, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It wasn't one of his games. Both among NOA and also some Nintendo Japan guys would say, basically, you guys get this because he doesn't care that much about it.
We'll get to Metroid and more games in a minute, but first we need to step back and look at the state of the studio at this time. Retro had its rise, now it's time for the fall. We should also note timelines overlapped for all these cancelled games. All 4 started basically the same time. Football and Car Combat got cut the same day to narrow Retro's focus, then later Metaforce turned into Metroid, and finally Ravenblade was shut down so all resources could be devoted to Samus. When games got cancelled and Nintendo cut off the money spigot, Spangenberg had to lay off half his employees. Then soon after, half of them got laid off too. What was once a 200-man studio had now been thinned down to only 50. That's when the dark times began and the crickets came.
We had 4 games. Cut. I mean, that was at the point where they laid off even some administrative staff. We didn't have a front lobby person anymore. The lobby was closed. All these offices were shuttered. It just seemed very bleak. And they would just shut off sections of the building at a certain point. So there was no AC and there was no lights on, and it was just dark and humid, and a lot of crickets moved in. So there was always just hundreds of crickets. If you ever went back there with a flashlight just to look around, and scare yourself. The crickets would just go running and jumping, and it kind of became like a thing where if this one guy found a cricket in his office one day in the safe zone, where we were still alive, and then he got laid off the next day, and we're like, it's the crickets. If you see a cricket, it's the sign of death. You have to get out of here. So that it became a running gag at the time.
Retro never fully recovered. There's still about 50 people today, and instead of developing 4 games at a time, they only really have enough manpower to make 1. It was around the time that nothing was left except Metroid that Spangenberg's extracurricular activities started catching up with him. There was a guy who owned some local strip clubs, Don King. People called him DK. DK was king of Austin's nightlife and had a website where he showed off his debaucherous parties. Spangenberg admired DK, basically wanted to be DK. So Spangenberg started throwing parties too, and made his own website to show them off. Eventually, people at Retro stumbled over it.
It was a lot of strippers doing, lots of stuff. People at the company saw it and were kind of upset about it. Some people, because they're like, look, things aren't going great. What is Spangenberg doing partying on his boat? And other people, because, hey, what kind of guy is this who parties in this manner?
There's titty dancers and coke and, whatever else, and that was just what happened. That was just part of being in Texas in the summer. And so he got pretty deep into that world.
It was only a matter of time before Nintendo found it too. You could probably guess their reaction.
Yeah, I mean, it might be what happened, but not for most normal people. Sorry, this is Bowser. The one on the floor's name is Peach. What I recall of it is that it was like pictures of him, I think at his house, but with like a whole bunch of scantily clad friends. Like more than you would expect. Kind of, and people were like, you're funded by Nintendo, right? Like family-friendly Nintendo. I just remember thinking at the time it was going to be a problem. If you were adventurous, maybe Internet Archive, I don't know if you'd find something in there or not. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was.
Sinful Summer. That was the name of the website. And we did check the Internet Archive, but the web's been wiped clean of all Spangenberg's escapades. Nintendo didn't get rid of him immediately. He was Retro's founder, after all, not just an employee they could easily fire. Midway through Metroid Prime's development, they bought out all his shares for $1 million. Then he was gone. And well, that's the end of Spangenberg's story as far as Retro's concerned. Forced out of a studio he founded once again, Spangenberg dropped off the face of the earth not long after. If you search online, you won't find hide or hair. We were curious what became of him and eventually found out. Off the record though. We'll just say Spangenberg's out of the games biz these days and still very much alive. What was left of Retro went into full research mode, watching speedruns and reading countless forum threads. James Dargy made Samus a new ship, with some guns on bottom you never see in-game. Sid Newman made an early Samus based on 80s supermodel Cindy Crawford, and did some motion capture of himself as Samus. 30% more areas were built than what even made it into the final game, including an additional ice region. Everyone understood the stakes. If this game failed, Retro was done. Maybe Nintendo developing games in the West entirely was done. They wrote another 1,000-page design document for the 3rd time in a row.
Hit 1,000 pages, you cancel the game. That's what we said. I remember the day we hit 1,000 pages, I'm like, all right, guys, get ready to get this canceled.
But it didn't get canceled. After all those layoffs, the 50 devs left were the cream of the crop, and they were determined to show the world this troubled Texan studio had what it takes. But the crunch was horrendous. They called it a death march, with one guy we talked to saying he had to choose between Metroid and his marriage. He ended up choosing his marriage and quitting. Eventually, John Whitmore quit too, essentially getting replaced by Mark Pacini, who you'll hear more about later. Miyamoto, despite his willingness to risk the franchise, still gave it his all. He fought Spangenberg to insist on Samus's first-person view, and he personally remapped the controls late in development. We don't need to spend much more time on Prime though, it's already well documented. You know how it ends. Retro finally launched their first game, earned higher review scores than any GameCube game ever released, and outsold Super Metroid 2-1. This marks the end of the first Retro Studios era, and the beginning of the second. As soon as Prime was finished, a lot of devs were exhausted from the crunch and resigned. Management immediately tasked some guys who didn't leave with cooking up a game plan for a sequel that'd be made in a single year. They called it an idea document. If Metroid Prime was the series' Ocarina of Time, this was going to be its Majora's Mask, a quick turnaround sequel that expanded on its predecessor's mechanics with some reused assets and a darker tone. Here's the plot, according to the document. This adventure would take place immediately after Samus takes off from the surface of Talon 4, with Samus deciding to take a long nap in her cryo chamber as her ship autopilots home. While she's sleeping, the ship's computer picks up on a distress signal from a massive alien vessel drifting out in space. As her ship approaches, a tractor beam activates and pulls her in. When Samus wakes up, the alien vessel's power is out and seems abandoned, and she's got no choice but to investigate. Eventually, she realizes she's on a warship full of alien soldiers in suspended animation until they arrive at their destination, a peaceful planet they're gonna wage war on and conquer. It turns out the AI drew Samus and other bounty hunters on board to collect their combat data, so it can improve its genocidal alien army. But the ship's also full of robots who aren't asleep, so that's who Samus is gonna spend most of her time fighting throughout the game. Also, the ship's AI has gone mad and constantly switches between different personalities, a crazy killer and a creepy child who plays tricks on Samus, like locking doors and shutting off electricity. Sometimes it acts like a mother who offers help and dishes out upgrades. And its final personality's the Martyr, who takes the form of a boss battle. As far as gameplay, Samus's mission is to kill the ship's engines, destroy the AI, and eradicate all life forms on board. She'd have some new moves to help her out, like cloaking, wall walking, ceiling hugging, infrared vision, and a melee punch. Since the ship makes up the entirety of the game world, it'd only be a fraction as big as the first game, but make up for it with density, and lots more scanning and morph ball puzzles. At some point, the ship would get sucked into a parallel dimension, allowing for new types of puzzles, like areas with low gravity, reversed gravity, or time flowing backwards. The devs wanted to implement multiple potential solutions to puzzles, so the game would have more replayability. They were also considering campaign co-op, where a friend plays as Android Samus or another bounty hunter. The doc also mentions versus modes, like split-screen deathmatch and Team Capture the Metroid, which basically would have been capture the flag, but the flag's a Metroid you've got to contain and get back to your ship. Ultimately, that game never came to be, and they ended up making the Prime 2 we know today instead, which took 2 years to develop instead of 1. While Prime 2 was in development, Nintendo reorganized Retro's leadership once again. When Spangenberg left, one of Retro's producers, Steve Barcia, had taken his place. Devs we spoke to said he would often ignore Nintendo's suggestions, like making Metroid Prime first-person instead of third-person. They weren't actually suggestions, just the polite Japanese way of giving orders. As soon as Spangenberg was gone, getting rid of Steve was next on Nintendo's to-do list. So in 2003, they fired him and installed a new Retro president, Michael Kelbaugh. He'd been working for Nintendo of America in QA and business development the 15 years prior, and unlike his predecessors, Nintendo finally had a guy who they could trust to understand their suggestions and put them into action. By the time the Metroid team finished Prime 2, they were suffering from a pretty nasty case of franchise fatigue. They didn't want to make a third game, so Prime's lead designer Mark Pacini and some other guys wrote up a 21-page pitch for a Zelda tactics game called Heroes of Hyrule. Again, we already broke that story last year, so we won't retell it today. Long story short though, Nintendo President Iwata asked them to develop one more Metroid game to make it a trilogy, and show the world what the upcoming Wii hardware was capable of. The devs agreed, but under the condition that afterwards they could take some new Nintendo IPs out for a spin. After Prime 3, a few guys got to work porting the first 2 games to Wii for the Metroid Prime Trilogy collection. Meanwhile, 3 other games were being prototyped in playable form: Adept, the Blob Game, and Zelda Project X. We mentioned earlier that Retro leadership were always looking for handheld games that could act as side projects while they worked on big console releases. None of them ever came out, although Retro did collaborate with Nintendo to help make Mario Kart 7. One unfinished DS project was codenamed the Blob Game. We'll be quick with this one because we couldn't dig up any visuals, we were just told about it, so we're gonna have to use footage from other games that sound vaguely similar. The Blob Game was a physics-based 2D puzzler where you play as a sticky blob. You'd use the touchscreen to stretch the blob in one direction, then let go and it'd fling in the opposite direction. One stage was described as having steam vents you'd fling over, then rise up through the environment. We talked to 3X devs, with one saying, quote, "The project was pretty far along when it was shelved, including tooling being in place and a pitch to attach booze from the Mario IP. Some concept art leaked back in 2020, but till now, fans didn't know what the gameplay would have been or if it was ever in active development. According to retro artist Sammy Hall, the game would have taken us to, quote, very, very unfamiliar territory, deep in debt at Haunt University, powers and abilities, broomies, possession powers, and a spider boss. Oftentimes the way development works is gameplay's cooked up first, then an existing IP's attached to it later. From what we were told, it seems the Blob gameplay existed as the prototype, but everything Mario related was only in the artwork and pitch documents. Everyone at Retro really liked the Blob game and thought it had a lot of potential, but Nintendo's response to the pitch was that there were, quote, a lot of teams who could build that title, and they didn't want Retro spending their valuable time on that kind of project. The game was killed off, but parts of it still had unfinished business, with tooling from its development eventually making their way into Donkey Kong Country Returns. And now for Project X, a Wii Zelda spin-off starring Sheik. Fans lost their minds when concept art leaked in 2020, imagining an amazing Zelda game they were robbed of. A couple years later, we put out a video where the devs told us there was much more than just art. They spent 9 months making a playable demo. You can go watch that full video if you want, but a lot of folks didn't see it and are still dreaming about Sheik's adventures. So we'll sum up what we talked about last time, along with some new info.
I feel the statute of limitations has expired on a lot of this because it's 15 years ago, and I'm interested in telling the truth.
You remember Paul. He was a Prime 2 and 3 programmer. From 2007 to 8, he was working on both Adept and Project X.
I see people commenting on that concept art on the internet and being like, oh my God, Retro was working on a Zelda game. That would have been so awesome. And like, I understand that feeling, but what they have to understand is it was not actually a Zelda game. At no point was it anything like, really anything like Zelda. It was this brain dead whack-a-mole and broken player traversal thing that was like in the Zelda universe, but had nothing that you would associate gameplay wise with an actual Zelda game.
Link's crossbow training had just come out and sold 6 million copies, more than all the Metroid Primes combined. Project X's designer said that kind of simplified Wiimote gameplay was the way of the future, and set up X so it was basically whack-a-mole, but with less decision-making. The way it worked was Sheik would be traversing the overworld, then get sucked into a separate battle location just like in old-school RPGs. Then some wolves surround Sheik and jump at her one at a time, and all the player did was waggle the Wiimote to attack them when they jumped. That was pretty much it. Another dev who wanted to remain anonymous agreed. The art was cool, but Nintendo wasn't going to let the Zelda IP anywhere near that kind of low-quality gameplay. There were a lot of Shadow of the Colossus fans at Retro, and Paul suggested they make a Zelda in that style where you scale up giant enemies, but management didn't want to hear it. So Sheik Whack-A-Mole continued for 9 months, until it was eventually pitched to Nintendo, who terminated the project as soon as they saw it.
But the problem is it's actually fewer decisions involved than whack-a-mole, because with whack-a-mole, you know, you've got all these moles popping up and you've got to prioritize which one do I hit, which ones do I ignore, what order am I going to whack these moles in. There's actually some thinking involved, whereas with this, it's pure stimulus response. So if you don't have that level of interesting decision making, then you don't really have gameplay. Had it been an actual Zelda game, I would have been like, yes, let's do this. I love it. I would have been so gung-ho on that. But again, it was not actually a Zelda game. It was an experiment gone wrong that happened to be set in the Zelda universe.
The original leaked art came with some notes, saying the story was going to be a Master Sword origin story with the bad ending of Ocarina of Time. More specifically, the game would be exploring the last male Sheikah's journey transforming into the Master Sword, after the rest of his race was killed by genocide, presumably at the hands of Ganon. In the comments of last year's video, some of y'all pointed out some timeline inconsistencies. We ran them past the devs, who said in these sort of games 99% of the work goes into the gameplay and world, but the story's constantly changing through development. So what you just heard was really more of a snapshot in time. If Project X ever saw release, the final story would have been different. Maybe a little, or maybe a lot. Regardless, you didn't miss much by never getting to play it. Adept, the Blob Game, and Project X all had their own individual reasons for getting canned, but they also share one thing in common: timing. Mark Pacini was the studio's design lead as far back as Metroid Prime 1. Undeniably a very talented guy and absolutely critical to the studio's output. The same week Nintendo said no to Project X, Mark started asking Retro's HR director questions that made it apparent he and a couple other senior devs were about to quit and start their own studio. Then they were forcibly escorted off the premises, never to return. It turned out there'd been a conspiracy in the works before X was even cancelled. Electronic Arts had offered Mark a sweetheart deal to build a new studio with their money, basically. EA. They keep popping up, don't they? Anyway, with Retro's top guys now exiled, there was no chance they'd be able to right the ship on projects currently in development. A few days later, Retro president Michael Kelbaugh called everyone into a meeting and announced, "Our next game is going to be bringing back the Donkey Kong Country franchise, and that's what we're doing. And I'm not going to hear any objections. The decision is final." That meeting rubbed a lot of devs the wrong way. Some quit soon after, and a few eventually made their way to Mark's new studio, Armature. That aside, it was probably the best business decision. With their top guys gone, side-scrollers were a lot easier to make than something like Portal or Zelda. It paid off too, with Donkey Kong going on to sell 3 times more than Metroid ever had. And that brings us to the end of Retro Studios' second era, with the third continuing into the present. To this day, Retro, EA, and Armature's offices are all about 15 minutes from each other in North Austin, Texas. Small world. Iguana was set up there too, by the way, but they went out of business in 2004. Under our previous videos, some people commented that Retro should pitch their ideas to another publisher, who might greenlight games Nintendo passed on. Unfortunately, that's impossible. Nintendo owns Retro. Devs who work there, their paychecks don't say Retro Studios, they say Nintendo of America. That's who pays their salaries. So when Nintendo rejects a pitch or cancels a game, that's that. Looking to the present, fans have been extremely curious about what Retro's been up to since 2014, when they launched Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Retro started development on Metroid Prime 4 in 2019, but what was going on the 5 years before that? We've talked to some devs who worked on cancelled projects, but they wouldn't drop so much as a hint, except that it wasn't Metroid. We're more of a gaming history channel anyway, not a leak channel, so we suppose it's just as well. Anything cancelled that recently might actually have a chance of being brought back. So frankly, we might not spill those kind of beans even if we had any. Maybe we'll be back at some point far in the future with a video covering the gap in Retro's resume. If you're looking for more Retro history right now though, did you also know there were internal paper pitches for Metroid Tactics, Star Fox Armada, and Heroes of Hyrule? We broke all those stories over the past couple years, so for your convenience, we've combined them all into one video, along with a few other canned Nintendo projects. Click the video on screen if you want to see it. Or if you'd rather see a bunch of random Metroid trivia, click the other video. Special thanks to all the devs who were willing to talk to us, especially the ones who wanted to remain anonymous. And thank you for watching. See you next time.